Today on Lessons I Learned in Law, I'm joined by David Flavell, who is General Counsel and Corporate Secretary at PepsiCo. Now, PepsiCo is a constituent of the Fortune 50 in the US. So this is an absolutely massive position that David holds. The legal function is around 500 people globally at PepsiCo. So fascinating guy. The conversation's absolutely packed with really practical and tangible advice for anyone that's looking to build their credibility and influence in a large organisation in particular. Now, David's built his career across continents. He's practiced law in-house in so many locations, and his career has been very much a mix of working in developed countries and the non-developed countries as well. And he's taken some really key learnings from that experience and has felt that has shaped his leadership style. What really stood out for me was chatting about commercial acumen, and it's a phrase that's used so often and thrown around, and being a strategic partner, but it was the practical aspects of what that means and how the steps he's taken to embed himself as a commercial advisor. He looks at himself as being an executive with a legal skill set rather than as a lawyer. How he's done this is if he's ridden potato trucks on PepsiCo's agricultural sites. He has really embraced opportunities to go and meet with operational business units and work within those business units, as well as gaining as much access as he can to board level advisors and stakeholders. And he thinks these are key ways for how lawyers can embed themselves as indispensable resources within a business, where they're not just coming to you where there's an issue, they're really partnering with you as a strategic business partner. So if you've ever wondered how to grow your remit, build trust at the executive level, or how to translate your legal expertise into business value, then this one's packed with loads of information and really is for you. So let's dive in. Thanks for taking the time. We were just discussing you're based on the East Coast, but I've given a bit of a brief overview of your position in my introduction. But it'd be great if we could start with a bird's eye view, or your insights as to what your current position is and team size, etc.
Sure. So so I look after sort of the legal function for PepsiCo on a global basis, as well as our board and corporate secretarial, compliance and ethics function, human rights, global security, crisis management, and privacy. So which is obviously an interesting portfolio of areas to look after. There'd be about 550 plus people in the team spread around the globe, from groups that are in sort of fairly significant hubs of team members, say in the US or Mexico or some of our other larger markets, to some places in the world where I might only have one person looking after a variety of places. So it's a great team spread all over the place. I think we, from a structure kind of point of view, we generally try and match the business. PepsiCo is generally sort of structured on a geographical basis. We have food and beverage businesses, but we sort of follow a geographical structure, and my teams follow that same structure. I think it's important to have the team as close to the business as possible, which is why they are spread around. We do have some, if you like, specialist groups that operate sort of on a global basis. Like I have a global IP team, a global human rights team,
Right.
and so on, and a few other groups around food safety and those sorts of things. Nice. But while the team is sort of structured to match the business and deeply embedded in the business, we do have a hardline reporting structure. I know some organizations have to, but everyone in my team reports up through our function and ultimately up to me,
Okay.
as well as the budget for that team, which I think is
Right.
important from we're here to drive the business results and support the business and things, but there's also an important independence element, if you like, to what we do, and therefore it's important that ultimately how people's careers are managed and how they're compensated and everything else kind of sits within the confines of what I manage, rather than
Legal. Cool. Do you have regional general counsels in various hubs then?
Yeah, so our business has like a head of North America for food and beverages, and our structure's just recently changed geographically, and then we have a head of a CEO for our international beverage business outside the US. We have a CEO for sort of Europe, Middle East, Africa. It takes you as far across as say Pakistan and things, and then we have a head of a business for China and Asia Pacific and so on. And those CEOs all have leadership teams, and on those leadership teams would be my general counsel for that particular region, right? Who is the key legal support for the relevant CEO, and there'd be a CFO and a head of HR and so on in each of those areas. And that structure then follows as you go down to particular business units under that. You'd have GMs of those businesses, and there'd be a lawyer who would sit on their leadership team and would be responsible for the relevant.
Okay. So they're visible, like they've got visibility on the micro strategy within the businesses that they're aligned with, but the overall reporting structure within legal.
That's
cool.
Right.
And accent not from not an East Coast accent.
No.
Where's home originally?
Home originally is Melbourne in Australia. So although I'm first generation Australian, I have English parents, and I guess like quite a few people in Australia. My wife, her parents are Greek, but she was born in Melbourne as well. So Melbourne's home, and that's where career first started. But have lots of family still spread all over the globe and things as well.
Nice. Cool, keeps it interesting.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for sharing that. We'll jump into lesson one if you could share that with me, please.
Sure. So first lesson, and as you know, in thinking about these, I thought, well, sort of, what are some lessons that are relevant to my career, which has been a global career, but I hope also relevant to people, if they stay, wherever they work. Obviously, focus more on the in-house side of things. But also lessons that I thought were relevant to ultimately giving me the career that I desired from a seniority point of view. But also, I always look at there's two sides of a career. One, sort of, what do you want to do from a seniority responsibility, but then what type of career you want. And in the law, obviously, private practice, which I did for 10 years, I'd say more a technical expert, and obviously arm's length, as opposed to in-house and the type of in-house career I wanted. Because again, in-house, you can be a specialist in a particular area. I wanted a broader strategic type role and less of a technical role, even though, as I said, I did that for a number of time. And also gave me a sheer variety of different issues and complexity and exposed me to different things. So in thinking about the lessons, I kind of thought about sort of what might play into those issues. So the first one, I guess I'd like to talk about is really what I call the benefits of broad global experience and the benefit of working and having experience both in developed and developing markets.
Right. Cool. And when did you when did you first experience this? Because you alluded to there, but just for the benefit of listeners, you were partner in private practice, right, in Australia?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, at law school, I said, I want to be a lawyer in one of Australia's big corporate law firms. I want to be a partner, and that's what I want to do, and I'm sure I'll do that for the rest of my career, sort of thing. And I did start at one of Australia's big law firms, Cause Chambers Westgarth. I was one of, say, 17 people that started in our Melbourne office. We had offices around the country, and at the start of the year, you'd get significant number of graduates in each office. I was one of 17. Interestingly, by the time I made partner about 8 years later, I was the only one left, which was an interesting thing. Some had done the usual parts of the UK, work at one of the Magic Circle firms.
Yeah.
Interestingly, only one had swapped law firms, I think. Other people had gone barristers or gone in-house or decided they didn't want to be lawyers, right? But that's kind of what I thought I'd want to do. But I guess when I was in private practice, I was an antitrust or competition law and corporate law specialist. I probably, as well as servicing the rest of the firm, if people had clients who had antitrust competition law issues, I'd help out there. My career was probably focused on a small number of large clients. I used to do a lot of work for Foster's Beer and Wine Group back when it was still independently listed in Australia and things. And so and a few other large clients, BP was another one, and others. And I used to spend a very large amount of time in their offices. And as the years went by, and I had these deep relationships with these businesses and was really sort of very embedded, I just realized I enjoyed more and more that side of things rather than the sort of technical practice of law. And so, I'd been a partner for a couple of years, and I kind of sat there thinking, I'm not sure this is what I actually really want to do. So to great surprise to my wife, who had only married me 6 months before and thought she was marrying a Melbourne-based partner of a law firm, I said, we're off. And we went to New Zealand, which is an unusual choice, but a beautiful country. But the market's quite a bit smaller than Australia. But I went and joined Fonterra, which is New Zealand's largest company, and it was for a global M&A type job. And that's I decided I wanted to have a global experience. I liked M&A, so I was that was a very much planned move. And my wife was still working at the time and things. But after that planned move, there's probably not as much planning and strategic thought as to some of the paths that I ultimately then took.
So on the lesson, are we classing New Zealand as a developing market?
Very much a developed market. To get home, I have to fly through Auckland. It's the quickest way. So I'll keep my Kiwi, and I do have some great Kiwi friends. So it's very much a developed market. But it gave me the first. I was doing lots of stuff, say in Indonesia and Southeast Asia, and as well as doing stuff in Europe and things. And then subsequently, I then moved to after Fonterra, I moved to Danone, and that was based in Shanghai. And I was looking after all of Asia Pacific and the Middle East, and doing a lot of deals in interesting places. And what it really sort of, and again, that gave me developed and developing market experience. And really, sort of, what I take from all of that is, first of all, I think the more parts of your business that you can work in, obviously the greater knowledge and depth of knowledge and understanding of how a business operates you get. But it obviously also teaches you the importance of flexibility, and I call cultural savviness. I mean, how business is conducted in Japan is dramatically different than how business is conducted in India or Indonesia or subsequently I've gone on and looked after other parts of the world, Latin America. I think there are very different cultural aspects. And I think working in these different markets shows you the importance of flexibility, right? I mean, I've always been very conscious of needing to flex my style for the circumstances in which I'm in, right? That doesn't mean that I'm not genuine as far as who I am and what I'm talking about and everything else, but just conscious of the different cultural aspects and how, and I think to deliver the result I wanted to achieve, I was like, well, I'm the one who's going to have to flex, right? And sort of, take ego and everything out. Don't think I'm going to turn up as the big hotshot lawyer and run everything. It's like, no, work out how things work culturally. But and I also think in developing markets, quite often, things like the law might not be as clear as it could be in a developed market. Sometimes, breadth or specialization of external counsel you might be relying on might not be as strong or as abundant as it is in developing markets. I could go and find 50 top class M&A lawyers in New York fairly quickly this morning if I wanted to, right? I'm in some other markets, it might be that there's generally a perception that there's 2 or 3 that are the best, and all multinationals are wanting to get access to those people, and it's a different kind of challenge. So I think the developing market gives you great experience as far as how to operate in sort of less certain environments, sometimes more challenging as far as regulators and things. Developed gives you probably deeper technical sort of skills. Obviously, I'm talking generalizations because obviously these things can happen in both. But and when you're working for a large multinational, like I am, understanding like the SEC's requirements, the important things that a large multinational listed company have to be concerned about, which when you're operating as part of a business unit on the other side of the world and you've never had any experience in, you don't always appreciate that something that you might think is relatively small or country specific, and so you think, oh well, we'll just deal with it in this country. You don't realize that actually it can be significant and have an impact at sort of from a US regulatory point in our case. For example, most lawyers out on the other side of the world, I mean, my team knows, but most people wouldn't know that if you've got an environmental claim that's more than a couple of $100,000, there's actually a disclosure requirement in the US. You wouldn't think that given the size of our company, right? But it's those kinds of things. So I think working in both gives you a great insight into the broad picture, as well as giving you great skills and just sheer depth of knowledge about the business.
Yeah. Nice. And how do you think it's shaped your leadership style or your approach to leadership, having had that cultural experience or breadth of cultural experience?
Yeah, definitely. I think from a point of view of how I relate to and deal with people, and as I said, I go to any meeting always with a clear idea of what I think we need to achieve and things, as well as an openness as to what other perspectives there might be. But I do very much think, all right, I've got to be conscious of where I am, what's the group, and how I need to flex for that. And it just also, I think the thing that it helps greatly with in sort of my role and other roles I've had is, when I was sitting out in Shanghai or when I joined Pepsi out in Dubai and stuff, I was the local sort of lawyer for my CEO out there, and I'm trying to support the business. But I was also, if you like, in Pepsi's case, New York's general counsel's guy in Dubai, right? So I kind of serve 2 roles. And I think having experience in both gives you the understanding and sympathy, if you like, for what New York needs and what Dubai needs, right? And so when you have the insight for both, because sometimes New York will say, oh, we're preparing our filings for the SEC and stuff, and we need every market to provide us huge amounts of information and everything else. And they think, because in New York you can push a button to get that information, they think it's the same thing out in these markets, and it's not the same thing, right? And they don't understand how much work and time and effort that's going to impose upon the local teams, which are smaller and don't have as much resource and everything else. And the local team will say, well, this is ridiculous and everything else. And I sit there and go, well, I know why New York wants it, but I know how hard it is for you to provide it. And I actually think New York said they want this, but they probably only really need, half of what they're asking for. And then how can I work with the local teams to get them to understand the context of why it's needed and then make it more practical for what they have to provide. And I think it's just when you've had seats in both camps, it helps in that kind of situation. And I think it helps very much as far as you build trust with both sides of that equation.
Right. Where out of all the jurisdictions you've worked, where would you say has the most open approach to lawyers and getting lawyers involved in stuff, and then those that are, I guess, take more time to build up that trust? Would you say you've noticed anything in particular?
No, there are definite differences. I would say the US probably leans more into lawyers being more closely involved and involved sooner, generally. I think that comes from the fact that just, how heavily sort of, legally structured the US is, and lots of litigation and everything else. I will say, so they're used to getting lawyers involved earlier and sooner, but because of the highly litigious environment, they still have a mindset of, well, I'm talking to a lawyer because there's a problem, or I'm going to get sued, or I'm worried about being sued, right? Still not necessarily thinking of, oh, this is a strategic thought partner, right? Other markets, I think, are more challenging because since they don't have as such a sort of litigious environment, there isn't the fear of being sued, and therefore there isn't this natural inclination to involve them. So, so certainly when I joined Danone as a French company out in Shanghai and looking after Asia and the Middle East, as I said, the initial reaction was, and I think civil systems, which obviously the French system, most of the executives I was working with had come from France, civil legal system, which is different than a common law system, I think, as well. So they were very sort of like, oh, this guy I see when we need some contracts, or, so. And I very quickly kind of worked to sort of change that impression. And we were doing a lot of M&A in a lot of markets, and I had a great relationship with the head of M&A for the region, and he and I spent a lot of time together, and I think that helped. We also had a few crises. There's nothing better for building trust and a relationship with business people and things than a crisis. You don't want the crises, but it's an opportunity. So over time I kind of worked, and I mean, the best way to break that barrier is to spend time in the business and understand the business, so that you can talk to people in business language and show people that you're actually interested in driving a business result.
Yeah, that's good. That's good advice. I think being embedded. What if that's not enabled by the legal, by the legal team in terms of supporting that, or the structure doesn't lean into getting involved?
Yeah, and that is, I at times in some other, maybe the lawyers weren't always on a leadership team, right? I then spend a lot of time working with the business leaders to make them understand and why they want their lawyer to be on their leadership team. And at first they go, oh, but we rarely talk about legal issues. And I go, no, the point is the lawyer needs to understand the business. They need to understand what you're trying to achieve as the GM of the business. And the only way that they can advise, the only way they can provide sensible guidance and things, is if they understand the business, they understand the strategic objectives, the challenges, and everything else. And so people ultimately get that. But I also, quite frankly, in some markets have to get the lawyers to understand that as well. We're a legal and compliance and as I said, the other groups in the team. But ultimately, our job at Pepsi is to help the business sell more food and beverages. That is the number one objective. Now, we have an important legal governance function to provide, right? And we should never lose sight of that and our independence around that. But ultimately, we're not a law firm. We're here to drive business results, right? And I look to lawyers not just to provide technical legal advice. You have to take a much broader strategic advice. I mean, now we have specialists, we have people at different stages in their career, so exactly kind of what they're doing on a day-to-day basis can change. But for a long time, I've described to my wife and others that my career pretty much is dispensing common sense, right? And taking a broad picture of the challenges on any particular issue. Yes, I get into the technical stuff from time to time, but I mean, sometimes I'll call my wife and say, oh, I practice law today because I haven't done it for a while, right? So, and that's the message I get across to, try and get across to my team constantly. And to me, it's, if you take a broad view, if you understand your business, it will half the time solve the constant complaint of an in-house lawyer is the business doesn't involve me soon enough. They crunch me ultimately for an approval or something like that. I get sent a contract, I get asked to advise on it, but I've been given no context or anything like that. Well, if you play like a technical lawyer, that's the environment you'll operate in. If you take a broader perspective and take a broader interest and understand the business, you're going to get involved earlier, and you're going to have a more rewarding relationship and with the business and career.
Yeah, good. On a personal note, with where's been a lot of global movement and different assignments, what's been the hardest sell to the family to up sticks and move?
Interesting. As I said, I love New Zealand. It's a lovely place. My wife was not convinced about moving to New Zealand. Said she was still working at the time. It was just my wife and I, and she had some of her. She worked in the fashion industry. Some of her jobs in Australia had responsibility for Australia and New Zealand. So she used to travel there for work all the time. I never did. And she was very small. I'm not sure you're going to enjoy this. So that was a bit of a hard sell to her, and it was moving her from a job, and then it took her some time to find a job in New Zealand. But she did, and we both had international jobs, so we'd pass each other in the airport and things. So that was a little bit of a hard sell. I mean, China at first she scratched her head on that one because we'd never discussed it. She had parted company with her employer in New Zealand. We'd been there for a couple of years, and it was a question of, does she go and try and find another job, knowing that we were never thinking that this was a long-term position, or do I maybe start thinking about a move myself, right? Even though it was a little bit earlier than what I'd intended. I went and saw one recruitment person, walked to their office in Auckland, and had a chat with them. And by the time I'd done the 10-minute walk back to my office in Auckland, they called me and said, actually, there's an interesting job in Shanghai. Are you? I was like, right. Never thought about it. For a French company, working in, and I was Fonterra, dairy company in New Zealand, Danone, obviously big food and dairy company, and they said it could be a good fit. Yeah. 2 weeks later, I was on a plane to Shanghai, had an interview and things, liked it, came back, said to my wife, China, and she's like, well, that's killing my career and everything else. But off we went. She cried when we got there, but she cried when we left. Yeah. And our son came along while we were there as well. So yeah.
Ah, good. Well, a lot of saying yes to opportunities, I think, to be learned at that. And how long? So how many years is that at PepsiCo now?
Sorry, Scott, I missed that.
How many years is it you've been at PepsiCo now?
It's coming up for 14. So joined Pepsi in Dubai 1st of July 2011 was when I joined them, and that was 4 years out in Dubai, and then moved to the States in 2015, and that was another hard move. My wife loved Dubai. And so getting her to move from Dubai to Dallas was a bit of a challenge.
Yeah. And when you're like, imagine Dubai has changed a lot in that time as well. Like when you're joining a company that size, like what, I guess, is your goal at that time? Did you have sight or visibility of a route to becoming general counsel, or was that your aspiration? It's always a I think like people at certain levels within that size organization and size of legal function, they're looking for like, what's the progress look like? Where can I get to?
Yeah, I'm not sure when I moved from Danone to Pepsi, I probably still didn't have an insight that I was looking to become the general counsel of Pepsi. I'd had 4 fantastic years at Danone, as I said, looking after Asia and the Middle East, loved it. I think Danone, certainly at that time, was still a very French company. Yeah. Most of the DMs and around the different businesses and things were French. I think it's a company that's probably a third of the size of Pepsi. I was sitting there, as I said, I loved it, and I wasn't looking necessarily to leave. I guess I'd started thinking about it, but a headhunter approached me to move. But I had said to myself, I'm not sure what else I could do in Danone, not being French, right? So I think that question had come to my mind. And then when the move to Pepsi, it's like, well, similar region, but a business that's significantly larger. Dubai, I'd been there for work and things, thought it's somewhere that I could work. So I thought, well, it ticks boxes from bigger business, new learning, new challenges. Am I continuing to progress my skill set or acquisition of skills? So I said, yeah. So it's all right. Well, we'll go and do that. But I didn't think that would necessarily lead to a path of ultimately going to the US and being the general counsel. I think probably at that stage, I still thought at some point we might go back to Australia.
Right. Cool. See, when you're now looking at people to move, because a lot of candidates and people we speak to are interested in an international move and making that switch. Like an internal move, has there ever been a time where it hasn't worked out? Or what do you look for in people that you're perhaps putting on an assignment overseas for some time?
Yeah, well, obviously, in the world of budget constraints and cost and everything else, but also the personal cost of people moving overseas. I talked before about, well, I don't think there's the ability to get back to Australia work-wise for me. Now, I think, and the cost of moving people's families, having lived it myself and watching my wife's career get killed at a certain point and everything else, I understand. So the cost of it. So when I'm looking at, moving people, first of all, do they have a genuine enthusiasm for it? There's no point trying to force something. Do they have a genuine enthusiasm? Do they have the curiosity, the flexibility that I sort of talked about before about being, culturally savvy and flexing their style? Do they have a good knowledge of the business and a passion of the business? And then what's a particular person's existing skill set? And what do I think the sort of skill sets or boxes that you want to tick for their next sort of career move? So if you're going to move someone to another part of the world, you've also got to think about, well, what's their move after that, right? So it's sort of that construct that I look at. And then I also look at, well, what's the culture of the particular business they might be going into? And do I think there's a good fit? Because even though the lawyers all report to me and so on, or compliance people and things, do I think they're going to be successful with the GM or the CEO? Are they going to fit in well with that team? Because whilst ultimately I decide who sits in a particular market, they have to have a great relationship with the relevant business people. Otherwise, it's not going to work.
Yeah, lots for people to think about. I think the curiosity piece is vital as well. Right? So it rings true for everything. Cool. Right, we'll move on to lesson 2.
Right, which I guess is the importance of sort of being truly commercial and taking a much broader view than legal. And we've sort of touched on some of the points of this. And I mean, I look at it as really like it's the pathway to being a strategic advisor, right? And it starts fundamentally with, first of all, you have to know the business. And you would have heard this from the podcast you've done with other legal leaders, that I've listened to that you've done. It's a common refrain, right? And it's a common, if you ever ask a general counsel what they want from their team, or indeed their external lawyers, it's like, understand my business. But there's understanding a business at a thin level, and then there's truly understanding the business. And I expect my team in any given market to know what their revenue is, what their profit is, what the profit margin is, who their major customers are, how we make our money, which brands are the ones that drive most of the growth and things, and to really understand the challenges that the business is facing. What are the risks to those key aspects of the business? Who are our key strategic partners, major suppliers of raw materials, major customers and things? And what's that dynamic? And because for a couple of things. One, it goes to your ability to advise, which we talked about before. Two, it also goes to, we have a scarce resource, an expensive scarce resource. Where am I going to deploy my scarce resource? I'm going to deploy my time and my energy against the key drivers of our business, right? And the key risks of that, as well as the key enablers. So you have to have that construct to understand where you're spending your time, as well as thinking about, well, what are the challenges or the enablers to that business construct. So that's fundamental and something that I continue to drive. So if I go on a market visit to Colombia, the first question and because ultimately at some stage I pretty much was responsible for legal in pretty much every region of Pepsi as I moved around, I still have a good idea what the revenue is in Colombia or the profit in Colombia. So first thing I'll do if I go to a meeting is, all right, so what's the revenue and what's the growth rate? And they're kind of looking at, they're ready to talk to me about a court case or something like that. It's like, no, tell me about the business first, right?
Yeah,
Sends an important message to the team that's a critical thing.
Yeah, so take it off legal immediately, or drive the questions that you're asking are non.
Yeah. I'll meet with the GMs or the CEOs. They'll expect that I'm coming in to talk about a particular legal or political or other challenge. Of like, first question I asked, how's the business going? How's this particular bottler going?
Yeah.
Back when I worked in an area we used to have a challenging relationship with this supplier. What's that happening? They're kind of like, oh, right. Yeah. So we're going to talk business first, right? Sends an important message. And that's the other thing, as well as my team being able to advise the business properly by understanding the business context, it means they also talk to the business in a business language, business sense. That builds trust with the business partners, right? That makes the business person think, oh, my lawyer thinking like a business person. So I'm going to naturally bring them in closer, right? Because they understand what our business is. They understand what we're trying to achieve. I feel confident that my lawyers are spending their time on the important things. They're a key partner. So I think that's critical. And that's what I mean by being commercial. And then the next aspect of being commercial is, what's the result? What are you trying to commercially achieve? And also stop talking about yourself as just a risk management person. Most of what an in-house legal team does is major supply contracts, major customer agreements, M&A. It's building business. It's not sort of managing risk. So talk about yourself in that sense. Talk about the business result. Start a conversation with on any issue with asking the business person, what is it that you're trying to achieve, right? Rather than telling a business person that how they want to achieve something is wrong. That puts the context. The law department is the department of no, right? Which is not where you want to be. You want to be in the, tell me your business objective, your commercial objective. Take that information, put it in the business construct, and then if what they're wanting to do isn't the best way of doing it or the best way to achieve it, provide what that alternative is, right? But it's very much solution focused. Don't put problems on people's desks. Put commercial solutions on people's desks, right? I say anyone who, sometimes I receive, these long memos from people, and sometimes it's appropriate for someone to give me a long, detailed, because it's an important technical issue and they need to give me the detail, right?
Yeah.
Most of the times, someone sends me a 5-page memo. Invariably, with everything going on and everything else, I'm going to say, let's discuss it, right? And then they're going to talk to me about it, and they wasted a lot of time putting together a 5-page. I'd much prefer 4 bullet points that said the issue is this, we're concerned about this, we think the solution is this, can we talk about it? And faster for them, quicker, better result, and things. So be solution focused, and that's what I mean by commercial. And then, quite frankly, the other thing, as I said, commercial, but take a broader view than legal.
Yeah.
It means don't just look at the legal construct. Look at what the reputational risk or other challenges there might be around what someone wants to do, and is it really a good idea?
Nice. It's I mean, it's commercially. It's at every legal conference I think I've ever been to, in strategic thinking. But the way you broke it down and actual practical points in terms of going into that room and setting the tone that you're not here. You're primarily interested in Everything that isn't legal, and then how legal is affected by that is important. Who, like, within the businesses that you've worked within, are there any, like, in order to acquire that knowledge and that information, are there any obviously finance on the finances, but are there any functions, other business functions that you've found useful to build internal relationships with?
Yeah, I mean, definitely finance. You got to understand, and you got to be able to read a balance sheet and understand those sorts of things, right? But the other, in our business, given the nature of what our business, sales and marketing, right? And quite also procurement, agricultural supply chain. In our case, we're the largest acquirers of potatoes in the world, right?
Right.
Go and spend some time on a farm, right? Ride on a truck on a route ride, understand how our products are sold, spend anytime I ever moved roles in Pepsi, first thing, get out on a route with the business, say to the CEO or the GM, I want to go on the market visits with you. I want to, when you go and meet our partners and things, I want to come with you and things, so that you, as quickly as possible, develop that business knowledge and what the key players are. Also, particularly when you have a new commercial leader. So even if I didn't move, if my commercial sort of boss changed, I would do the same thing again. Because even though I may have known the business, because I may have been operating in it for several years, I didn't know how they saw the business. I didn't know what they saw as the strategic priorities or what they saw as the challenges. And so spending time with them to get their thoughts on those things was critical, but also, quite frankly, demonstrating to the business people that I cared about the business and that I was interested in the business and that I was interested in their views on the business was always a critical thing. I mean, I remember I've turned up in place. I've been on market visits where not the CEO I was supporting, but say the local people in the particular market we were at were like, well, David, it's great that we see you, but we're not quite sure why you're on this market visit. And, I talk about the things that I've already spoken about here, and you can see the switch in there, the light bulb goes off. It's like, oh, this person's interested in what we do. They want to be a partner, right? Which is, I think, a big step to get over, as far as then being the strategic advisor that's involved early and often and so on.
Yeah. And what about like balancing being commercial and those commercial instincts? It sounds like you'd call it, versus the legal, fundamentals. How do you resolve a clash there?
Well, no, there are certainly times where, ultimately you never hope that you have to just say no. You always think that there are a different way to do something, and quite often a better way to do something. But there are times where, you have to say no to something, or at least have a discussion about what's the perceived commercial benefit of doing something and what are the risks on the other side. And obviously there are certain things that you would never do. They break the law and everything else, or they don't fit with our values and everything else. That's a hard no, right? There are other things where you operate in the world of grey. And it may be grey from a reputational point of view. It may be grey because, particular law is not clear. And then I run it through a lens of, does it fit within our values and kind of ethical construct of the company? And if it's a yes to that, but I'm in a grey area, then I think it's a discussion about what's the perceived commercial benefit and what's the potential risk, and what is that benefit risk scenario. And that's where I think it's you get credit for that construct with the business. And it's also important about escalation, because someone in a particular country or business, they might think something's important because in the size of their business and things, they might see that the commercial benefit's quite large, but the risk or reputational thing may go well beyond their business, right? And therefore the downside is more significant than what they can see. And that's then when you get the importance of, well, sorry, this isn't your decision to make. It's got to go higher up the chain. And that's another skill that's important to teach people. And it's hard when you're the only member of the legal function sitting in a business on the other side of the world, and your GM wants to do something and you don't think it's right. and you're going to escalate it. It's like, how do I preserve that relationship of trust, right? And I always say, so in that situation, I always try and do a couple of things. One, I want to try and give coverage to the person in the local market, right? So that their relationship with the GM is still preserved. So in other words, there have been times where I lean in and it's like, if you like, it's big bad David in the Dubai office or New York that's the one that's causing an issue rather than the local.
Yeah.
But the thing I say to the local person is, you have to have the honest conversation with your business partner, and you have to tell them that you're escalating it, right? Because nothing destroys trust faster than you don't give the local person the full and honest answer, and then you kick it up the line on the corporate side, and then corporate comes in sort of raising questions with the GM. That destroys trust. So you've got to be firm, transparent, and if you're escalating, you've got to be open and honest with that, right? And sometimes, as I've had the different roles and things, that honest conversation has made the business person think again and think, well, actually, maybe I should listen to this person and we should change what we're doing. Other times it hasn't, and they want to have the discussion at the higher level, but they appreciate that it's been in a clear, transparent way, and the trust and the relationship is still preserved.
Yeah, good. That's gold. Golden information. Cool. We'll jump on to lesson 3.
Okay, lesson 3. And this one, it sounds a little bit cheesy, this one, but it is actually, it's terminology I do use with the team, and it's like, I call it being liquid and filling gaps, and being highly visible when things are tough. And by that, what I mean is, often, and this is quite often it's happened in different parts of the world where just the team you're in smaller, you don't always necessarily have specialization and things, but it's applicable everywhere. And it's just like, often issues and problems don't have a clear owner, right? Is it corporate affairs that should be looking after this? Is it legal that should be looking after this? Oh, it's a food safety issue. Why is an R&D? It's like, if there's a vacuum of leadership or ownership of an issue, fill that vacuum, fill that gap, right? Step into those things. Often they're difficult. Challenges and problems are the things that often don't have owners, right? Good times and things quite often have many owners, right? So if you see a gap, if you see a vacuum of leadership or ownership of an issue, and you have the skill set to sort of, and even if you don't feel 100% comfortable, but you're willing to sort of give yourself, step into it, own it.
That much is, your role, like we said at the start, when you the multifunctional, or like a broad church of things that sit under the general counsel role, how much of that has been areas that have been acquired, like in these sort of circumstances?
Yeah, I would say crisis management is a classic example of how that didn't sit with me originally, but over time has come across to me. And I think it comes from, since the very first day I joined Pepsi out in Dubai, and we had various challenges and things that weren't necessarily legal. They had a whole host of other issues, but I naturally kind of stepped into and sort of managed those things. And we've had other crises and things that, I just kind of, either myself or one of my team kind of owned it, and then I provided them support, and they could say, all right, well, and I think the way in which lawyers think about things is helpful in that space. And so that was one that people are, well, quite frankly, the person who was leading it left the company, and it's like, David obviously is the guy to give this to, because he's the one that always seems to be running these crisis things anyway, right? So that's an example. But I think it builds trust with people, because people see that difficult, challenging issues, you lean in, you're at the forefront, you're happy to sort of try and take on challenging things, right? It just it builds trust, and people see you as, well, you're interested in providing solutions and things. So And it gives you lots of other skills. So there's lots of these things that weren't in my technical wheelhouse that I worked on or my teams worked on. And it gives you a whole different range of skills and things that obviously build you into a better rounded, I see myself as a 30-year executive who happens to be a lawyer, right?
Yeah, right.
So, and it's all these experiences that have helped sort of build my skill set and give me the knowledge and the thoughts and things that I have to sort of, I think, that improve what I do from a general counsel as well as what I do for the broader organization.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's see on that point, this is a bit of a recruiter's question, but the as your role evolves and you're taking on additional responsibilities, I think my advice is always lean into it and say yes, and like you want to expand the function and legal wants to take on additional responsibility. And the roundedness that gives you and the development opportunity. But how have you ensured that you're rewarded on that for those additional responsibilities and remits?
Yeah, it's an interesting challenge. And I mean, also I always say new responsibility doesn't always mean a pay rise, right? So
yeah, I think it's a balance. Right?
And I don't think you want to be seen as the person, like every time someone gives you something extra, you kind of like, well, where's my financial reward, right?
I agree. Yeah.
So it's a balance, right? I think, thankfully, I've never had to sort of push too hard on that side of things. But certainly with my team and things, as I talk to them about new challenges, new experiences, and when I know people are busy and things, that can come up. And sometimes I kind of, and I try and look at it reasonably, right? Do I think this is something that warrants extra compensation or a promotion? And there are ways, our system has, maybe there's an additional financial incentive, maybe, which is not still the same as a promotion through our particular levels in the organization. Other times I'll think it doesn't warrant any significant financial thing, but I'll have a conversation with someone as to why that is the case. The other thing I'll have a conversation with people about is you should always be looking to learn and acquire skills, but you should also always be looking, if you're managing a team, what are their learnings and what are their skills that they're developing? So sometimes when new responsibility or new activity comes onto someone's desk, the other conversation I'm having with them is, what are you going to take off your desk and delegate to members of your team, not for the purpose of shifting workload, and we're all busy and that's always a challenge, but how are you developing your team? How are you giving them the continual learning and everything else? So the message is always thinking about, well, who's doing what work, who's learning from what, and how we give people new experiences, right? So it's complex, but sometimes there is just a clear discussion of, this is a lot of new responsibility, I need some financial reward for it, right? So
you've got to know when to ask, I think, and at least make it be known. But
I would say on that, Scott, where I've been given significant responsibility at times, and it might happen in the middle of the year or so on, quite frankly, what I've normally done is I've worn the responsibility for the months or whatever it is. And then when it comes to getting ready for your annual review and talking with your boss, in my case, the CEO, but I mean, previously talking about, my sort of functional boss and stuff, as you're developing the objectives for the year ahead and having a discussion about the year in the past, as you flesh that out, I think quite often that in itself highlights to people that, maybe we better do something financially, rather than always looking to have a conversation as soon as the responsibility has been bestowed upon you, right? Take it, do it, be seen to be doing it well and enthusiastic about it. And then I've found that the rewards and things have almost taken care of themselves to a certain extent.
Yeah, it's good advice. I think you have to earn it once you're in there, rather than just taking it for that sole reason alone doesn't necessarily look right. So I'm just interested to hear how it's played out in your career. What would you have been if you weren't a lawyer? Where would your career have taken you?
I would have been a pilot. I a bit of an tragically, at any given airplane, I spent a lot of time in airports, given my job and things. I'm ashamed to say I could tell you whether exactly the type of aircraft that'll be going past the window, which aircraft certain airlines use, and everything else. So a bit of an I read air disaster books whilst on aeroplanes, which it can be off-putting for people. But
sat next to you.
yeah. So but yeah, and at one stage I was actually learning to fly. But although later I was already a lawyer when I was doing it.
Right.
But and then I moved to China, and they're not so big on people flying around privately. And then I got older and smarter and had a family, and realized that, I wouldn't trust a part-time doctor, so I'm not going to trust a part-time pilot. So I gave up learning to fly, but still love the aviation industry.
Nice. Has your career never woven into, or is an opportunity ever?
Nearly. It's interesting. When I was still in private practice, I was approached to be the head of legal for Australia for an airline called Ansett that used to be one of the two major airlines in Australia. At the time, it was owned by Air New Zealand, and they offered me a job, and I seriously thought about it. But I was close. I was probably 18 months from partnership, and I thought, oh well, I'm just going to push on and do this. Ansett went broke about 6 months later, so I was very happy that I didn't take that job. And there's been one other where I was approached about possibly being the GC for an airline, but the size of the role compared to what I was doing and things, sort of industry interested me. It didn't tick other boxes.
Pique your interest, at least raise an eyebrow.
I certainly looked at it harder than I might otherwise have because of the industry, right? So
you got me at airline, fair. And I'm asking guests around their podcast recommendations. Are you a podcast listener? Any?
I have to say, I'm not I think it's important that at times to try and find avenues to break from work, right? And it's hard. And I find it's funny, for years and years, I always wore a suit and tie to work and everything else. Our CEO has a very relaxed strategy, so we don't wear suit and ties to work. I actually find it makes it harder to switch off, because it used to be suit and tie, work, other clothes, not work. COVID also has made it harder because we all got used to working from home, and you'd work odd hours and everything else. For me, podcasts are one of the ways in which I actually use to switch off from a work point of view. So I don't listen to lots of leadership or other kinds of podcasts. I've been listening to some very interesting ones about lessons I learned in the law recently.
That'll be the advert for this episode.
And I do podcasts for fun. So I love Formula One racing. I've always brother and I followed it since a very early age and things. So I listened to a couple of podcasts around sort of Formula One racing and things in particular. So I follow those closely.
Melbourne. I was at when I lived in Australia. Went to the Melbourne Grand Prix, which you must have had experience of listening to when you were growing up.
Our house in Melbourne is about 400 meters from the track.
Oh, so. Right. Wow. You hear it going past. Nice. Cool. And I think I'm sort of in a bit of a zone with that, the switching off, and the podcast. I've just with everything that's going on, I'm sort of listening to things. I need to probably give it a rest on some of the podcast formats. But I was using I don't know if you come across the function on Notebook LM, Google's AI platform.
No, I haven't.
It allows you to digest any or convert any file into a podcast format. So
really,
two robots talking to one another, but it's quite good. We obviously live in Amsterdam, so our communication with the school is all in Dutch, and we've got 5-page long. They're restructuring some of the classes in certain years, fired it into this, and like it's pumped out 9 minutes of breaking it all down and giving you the overview of what that document says. So
it's fantastic. The whole AI thing and what you can do with it, as far as, you know, I talked before about getting long memos and everything else. Yeah, I have to say, law firms or other people that provide me sometimes long memos and things, I throw it into AI to give me a summary and everything else.
Yeah. It's, what do you think on the job front? Like, what one thing do you think? What one responsibility or task that sits on a job spec for lawyers just now do you think is the lowest hanging fruit for AI?
I think obviously the stuff around, and it's been around for a long time, you know, things like discovery and all those kinds of stuff, and the ability of AI to sift through large amounts of information and to distill it, and obviously with certain checks and balances and things, because we all know the stuff's not perfect, right? But that lower level volume type of work, whether it's checking or synthesizing large amounts of data into smaller manageable size and looking for trends and everything else, I think that kind of work is going away. If I look at our compliance team and looking at all the sort of speak ups we get through our sort of compliance line and looking for trends and so on, you used to have people, you know, who would be manually looking at the types of speak ups we would get and trying to distill what are trends or issues or gaps. Obviously now AI and everything else can take a bunch of data and spit things out and tell you, with these issues are being prevalent, and even looking for red flags, to be more proactive in compliance and things by trend data telling you that something might go wrong somewhere or something looks fishy. So that stuff, I think obviously lower level contract work, bulk kind of stuff is all being systemized, standardized, quite often self-help for the business. They plug a few details into the system, it spits out a contract. I still have quite a few lawyers who don't want to give that up, and it's like, again, scarce resource, focus on what's important. The business might get this lower level stuff right only 80% of the time. It's a risk we're willing to accept, right? Yeah. I don't think the legal profession is going to die because of AI. There's too much human interaction in any significant commercial arrangement. There's too much. What does the individual on each side want to achieve from a commercial point of view? And AI can't do that, I don't think, right? So I'm looking to buy a business that's set up by an entrepreneur. What's important to that entrepreneur? Is the entrepreneur just trying to maximize their profit on the sale, or is this their baby that they love and want to protect? And two very different things about how I do an M&A transaction, right? And that's the kind of stuff I don't think AI can replace. And having the conversation about the reputational or bigger challenges than that of something you want to do, right? So, but certainly the volume, lower level stuff is going away, right?
Yeah, I think you've got to embrace it and like not be threatened by it, and the goes back to all you said there, like being able to build the relationships and focusing your time on that and how it's going to embed within your current way of working.
I mean, I say to my team who are scared of it, right? And there are some challenges as far as you think certain levels of work where people cut their teeth and learn their skill and stuff. If AI takes away like that, how do you learn certain skills, right? There is that challenge. But more generally, I say, would you rather spend your time doing a lot of this bulk, lower level, sifting through bunches of information, trying to distill things, writing long, complex memos and stuff, or would you rather be dealing on strategic challenges and major kind of relationships with the business and everything? Which one would you rather spend your time on, right? Yeah. So I see it as a great enabler. I don't see it as it's going to have an impact that my head count is going to be dramatically impacted by it. What I do see is as I have a team of a certain size that are doing certain types of work right now. My business continues to grow. The regulatory challenges continue to grow. Everything gets more complex. So my team that's of a current size, while it might not get smaller, it might not grow as quickly as it otherwise would, and we might be focused on different types of work as AI takes away some of the more sort of rote stuff and everything else and frees us up and frees up capacity to focus on what's the new challenging issues. So that's how I see it. Really.
Yeah. Planes can fly themselves, but they still need two pilots.
Exactly.
Well, on that note, it's been great chatting with you. Thank you for your time, and thanks for sharing the lessons. I really enjoyed that.
Enjoyed it. Thank you very much for the chance to have the chat.
So that wraps up another episode of Lessons I Learned in Law, powered by Harriet Brown in-house legal recruitment. Now, I share these stories each week to help lawyers of all levels, and both in private practice or working in-house. And it doesn't matter if you're early in your career or you're already leading a team. Learning from your peers or from those who have walked in your shoes before, then this is the show for you. If you find it useful, I would love it if you could share it with your colleagues or share it with your network, or drop us a message just to let us know that you're listening and that you're out there. Feedback really helps us grow the show and take it in the direction that gives the most value to you, our listeners. So until next time, I've been Scott Brown. Thank you.